and we're going to get started. We've set aside an hour for this call and have built in a couple of opportunities for questions, Q&A. So we have quite a number of people on the call, so especially if you're in a location where there's going to be some background noise or you're going to be talking to somebody else, I'd ask you to mute your phone, and then when we get to the Q&A session, you can unmute and ask questions, and hopefully we won't have a free-for-all during the Q&A. We'll be able to sort through that. But please keep your phone on mute if you're in a noisy spot. So this is the legislative wrap-up call of the Virginia Housing Coalition and the Virginia Coalition End Homelessness. It has been, of course, the session ended last Saturday. It was a very high-profile and interesting session, of course, because two very high-profile issues, transportation and Medicaid expansion, really dominated the front pages during the session. We'll talk briefly about those toward the end of the session, but there was also a lot that went on during the session with respect to housing and homelessness, and we want to focus in on those. And we're going to do that in a couple of segments. The first segment, we're going to talk about budget issues, money issues, and we'll do that in maybe 10 minutes or 10 or 15 minutes, and then have a Q&A at the end of that. And then after that, we'll go to other legislation during the session. So I have with me Ali Faruk, and Ali is the Policy Director for Housing Opportunities Made Equal here in Richmond. He also represents the Virginia Housing Coalition during the General Assembly, during the session at the General Assembly. Robin Gann, who we had hoped was going to be available, unfortunately is not able to be with us today, so Ali is going to sub in for her, and we have a couple other folks from VCEH who may be able to answer some questions as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ali and let him start with the money side of things, and also remind you again, if you're in a spot that's noisy or you're going to be talking during the session, please put your phone on mute, and then you can unmute when we get to the Q&A portion.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ali Faruk from Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia Incorporated, HOME. I am the Policy Director, and for those of you that are not familiar with HOME, we are a fair housing organization located in Richmond, Virginia, and our mission is to ensure equal access to housing for all people. So I'm going to run through very quickly some issues, some very exciting things that happened at the 2013 session of the Virginia General Assembly. The 2013 session was not a budget year. Every other year in Virginia was a budget year, so last year they created the budget. But there were several budget changes because what happens is that every year they end up making amendments to the biennial budget. And so of concern to the nonprofit housing community was, of course, affordable housing and targeted efforts to reduce and prevent homelessness. And so to that end, there were several amendments to the FY 13-14 biennial budget that were passed recently that do provide for additional monies for both affordable housing and reducing homelessness. Most significantly, there was about $3.5 million that came to the Commonwealth as a result of the Lender Processing Services settlement. Lender Processing Services was basically a robo-signing organization, business. They just basically what they did is they put fake signatures on foreclosure documents, and because of that they were sued and they settled out of court, and some money came to Virginia. That money was put into housing. $1 million of that money was put into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was created last year via the budget process, and $1 million of that was put into preventing and ending homelessness, specifically $500,000 for rapid rehousing and $500,000 for permanent supportive housing. The primary thing that drove the budget amendments this year were the debates about Medicaid and transportation, and I will go into more detail about those later. But those were the big things that happened this year on housing in the budget. And I guess I'll go into some other issues. Why don't I go ahead and cover transportation and Medicaid real quickly, and then I'll go into more detail about specific outcomes for specific bills that were on the Virginia Housing Coalition's radar. So first, as many of you have probably read, the debate that dominated the General Assembly during the 2013 session was the debate about what to do about transportation. The Virginia Department of Transportation was basically slated to completely run out of money for maintenance, and so that is what galvanized the governor and people in the General Assembly to raise taxes to pay for it. And so the General Assembly did end up passing a significant transportation package that raises taxes on everybody to fill this maintenance
Pick up where he left off. I believe he was talking about transportation.
All right, well, I'll just quickly recap. As most of you know, the transportation package did end up passing. It raises the sales tax, eliminates the gas tax, replaces the gas tax with a wholesale sales tax on gasoline. There are also a variety of increases in fees, most notably a $100 annual fee on hybrids, which Bob Adams is excited about paying. And so if anyone needs more details on exactly what happened on transportation, I'd be happy to provide that to them offline. But suffice it to say that the transportation issue was the big one that was holding up the budget amendments from being released, and as soon as that was settled on, the budget passed. The other issue was Medicaid. What Virginia has agreed to do is expand its Medicaid program to take advantage of the generous federal matching funds that are available under the Affordable Care Act. The big hangup was that the governor and many Republicans had prominently come out against expanding Medicaid, despite the facts that it was a really good deal for the Commonwealth. They did end up expanding Medicaid up to about 133% of poverty, and but the one caveat was that if Virginia gets more flexibility to reform the Medicaid program. And so what they've created is they have created a commission that will approve some reforms to Virginia's Medicaid program. The commission is made up of several members of the General Assembly. This includes people like Delegate Steve Landis, Delegate Jimmy Massey, Delegate John O'Bannon, Delegate Johnny Joannou, Delegate Beverly Sherwood. The Senate will have some appointees to this commission as well. They have not been named yet. So that's a quick update on Medicaid.
It's not for Q&A on.
Sure.
So I think that covers kind of the money, the appropriations side of it. Recapping quickly, another $1 million into the Housing Trust Fund, $1 million for homelessness, split between half a million for rapid rehousing and $500,000 for permanent supportive housing. Any questions on the appropriations?
All right, one other thing I forgot to mention that I will mention is that there was some funding made available under DHCD, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, for housing mobility counseling. And this came out of a reform to the Communities of Opportunity Tax Credit Program. This is a pilot program that was created a couple years ago for the Richmond Metropolitan Statistical Area that would give a tax credit to landlords in low poverty areas if they accept housing choice voucher holders as tenants. Unfortunately, the tax credit program was underutilized, and so this year we got a bill passed that takes some of the money available for that tax credit program, about half, roughly $200,000, and instead creates a housing mobility counseling program to connect landlords with tenants. And so DHCD, I believe, will put out a competitive RFP that will go out for people who want to provide the housing mobility counseling in the Richmond MSA. That's a quick update. It's a program we're excited about because it says a lot about, it has the opportunity to really deconcentrate poverty and help low-income people move into areas with better schools and better jobs and hopefully break the cycle of poverty for their family.
The only other thing I would add just about the Housing Trust Fund is that, as a lot of you probably know, after last year's session, Department of Housing and Community Development did put together a framework for how the Housing Trust Fund would be structured. None of the money, there was $7 million appropriated last year, but for the second year of the biennium beginning July 1. And then the additional million this year means a total of $8 million beginning July 1. DHCD is working on the rollout for the Housing Trust Fund, so stay tuned for details on that. And the Housing Coalition will also be forwarding that information as soon as we have an understanding of when the application cycles are going to happen this year.
Do you want to say something about discharge assistance plan? Okay. I know that another thing that folks with the Virginia Coalition and Homelessness were tracking was the funding for discharge assistance planning. Unfortunately, I actually don't know if any of that money ended up in the conference budget.
$750,000.
$750,000. Okay, great.
So I have this little update.
Okay.
Do you-
No, it's okay. I think
was
total of $750,000 was added in this July 1, 2013 for discharge assistance, and that I think took the total to $1.5 million.
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So I'll start going through legislation for affordable housing legislation this year. Of course, there was the Housing Coalition signature bill HB 2005, patroned by Delegate Alfonso Lopez, which codified the Housing Trust Fund, basically took the Housing Trust Fund that was created last year in the state budget and put that into the code. The difference is that, if you're not familiar with it, the code is basically Virginia law. That is separate from the Virginia budget. Now, the budget always trumps the code, but the budget has said one thing, and the code still had the old Virginia Housing Partnership language. And so we cleaned all that up. It passed unanimously. We're very grateful to Delegate Lopez for doing a lot of hard work on the ground, talking to legislators, and it passed unanimously and will be signed into law soon. Other interesting bills, HB 1868, patroned by Delegate Tag Greason from Loudoun, created tax-free first-time homebuyer savings accounts. This bill has passed unanimously out of both the House and the Senate, and so coming July 1, the state will create these first-time homebuyer savings accounts so that they'll be exempt from state income taxes. And so that's something interesting to know for those of us that work with first-time homebuyer clients, that this is another resource available to them.
Hey, Ali, this is Andrew Sinclair with the Realtors in Hampton Road. That bill died in the Senate and was sent to the Housing Commission for study.
Really? I thought it passed.
No, it passed unanimously out of the House. We ran into some issues with the bankers in the Senate, and it got sent to the Housing Commission. So it died in the Senate, but it'll be back next year.
What were the bankers' issues with it?
They had some concerns on how those accounts would be administered. They like the bill in concept. They like the idea of having those accounts, but they had concerns about their responsibilities and account maintenance, and they wanted to sort it out before it became.
Okay, my mistake. I assumed they'd be administered the same way that the VITA accounts are administered.
Yeah, I mean, I just know that they had some concerns, and they asked that it be studied. And obviously, we want to make sure that they're on board, because they're the ones that will be really marketing it and having, if they're not on board, then the accounts won't be set up.
Okay. Well, that's exciting. We'll follow it as it goes through the Housing Commission.
And have it back next year.
Okay, cool. Other bills. There were several bills that, there was HB 1553, patroned by Delegate Manoli Lupasi, on tax assessments for scattered site affordable housing, and this bill passed unanimously as well, or passed unanimously since the first one didn't. There were also two bills by Delegate Bobby Orrick, which the Housing Coalition was in favor of, that did not pass. One was HB 1565 and the other was HB 1566. And what these bills did, the first one allowed any locality to amend its zoning ordinance to provide for an affordable housing dwelling unit program. Under current law, there's two sections of the Virginia Code that deal with this. Basically, one that gives more flexibility and one that gives less flexibility. And this bill would just expand that to more localities, whereas currently there's only 3 or 4 localities that are allowed to do that. HB 1566 allows localities to raise the recordation tax if it's dedicated to affordable housing. And both of these bills were killed in subcommittee. There's another bill. There are some other bills that were very interesting on land use. There's HB 1583, patroned by Delegate Rosalind Dance, which increases the vacant building registration fee from $25 to $250. This bill passed the House and the Senate. There was HB 1589, patroned by Delegate Randy Minshew, which allows localities to demolish abandoned buildings with the consent of the owner, and I believe, that one did pass as well. And really interesting bill was SB 748, patroned by Senator Bill Stanley, which created the Building Revitalization Grant Fund. So, of course, many of us are familiar with the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. The Building Revitalization Grant Fund was a similar concept, but it was to award grants for businesses that basically revitalize or retrofit vacant and abandoned buildings for commercial purposes. This is the second year it's been introduced, I think, and each time there's some money thrown into it in the Senate, and then it died in the House, but it's going to go to the Housing Commission for more study. And so I think it's an intriguing concept and one that the Housing Coalition should consider talking about supporting in the future, because, as many of us know, many of the areas where there is a lot of poverty, part of that is because there's not a whole lot of employment. And so to the extent that we can also revitalize the commercial areas of certain localities in addition to the residential areas, I think that creates a lot of economic dynamism that can be beneficial to low and moderate income Virginians. Other bills, HB 1408, patroned by Delegate Jim Scott. This was an interesting bill that basically removed the requirement that planning commissioners own real property, and it was unfortunately stricken from the docket. I'm not sure why, but that was one that the Housing Coalition was supportive of because it would allow more people to have involvement in the way that their communities are being developed and revitalized, and would support more inclusion and more representation from people who are not necessarily homeowners. So it might be something we want to talk about supporting in the future. Other bills, there were several bills on predatory lending. Unfortunately, none of them passed. The most exciting of which was a bill by Delegate Gordon Helsell that required open-end credit lenders to be licensed by the State Corporation Commission. And so open-end credit lending are basically what happened is when Virginia reformed payday lending, many payday lenders stopped payday lending and just instead transitioned into open-end credit lending, which is basically the same result in the sense that you have small loans with unlimited interest rates. Well, not unlimited, they end up being 300, 400%, sometimes 500% per year. And unlike payday lending or car title lending, there's no reporting whatsoever. There's no way to really know for sure exactly how much lending is taking place, how many loans the average person takes out, what the default ratio is, all that sort of stuff. And so in the interest of trying to figure out what is the impact of this type of lending on neighborhoods, our idea was that we should require them to be licensed and to report a few things to the SEC. Unfortunately, Delegate Helsell withdrew the bill, but we hope to see it again in the future. A couple of really interesting bills dealing with fair housing. SB 841, this bill defines 2-person per bedroom as a reasonable occupancy standard in the Commonwealth of Virginia. This was a very technical bill, but basically, ostensibly it was to target overcrowding in Virginia. But many people had a lot of concerns about the fact that there is no statewide occupancy standard, there is no nationwide occupancy standard, in certain limited areas, 2 persons per bedroom is considered reasonable, but it's sort of considered in addition to many, many other factors. And across the country, various housing groups have been reticent to create just a one-size-fits-all occupancy standard because families and housing needs come in all shapes and sizes, and houses and the way people live in them in homes and how many people live in them is different in urban and rural and different parts of the state, different parts of the country. And so in general, one-size-fits-all standards are very problematic. Unfortunately, this bill did pass the Senate unanimously, I believe. It ended up passing the House by just 1 vote. There was a very vigorous floor debate where several delegates talked about how problematic this could be. The language of the bill is okay, but of course the problem is always in how is it interpreted and how is it used on the ground. And so there's a very vigorous floor debate, and it ended up passing by just 1 vote. I believe it is 49 to 48 in the House of Delegates. It's now heading to the governor's desk. And so I think that's something we have to watch out for. I think it could end up being very, very problematic for low-income Virginians. It could be very problematic for certain Virginians that come from ethnic and cultural backgrounds where families are larger and there's more tradition of multi-generations living in the same housing. So I think that's something we really, really have to watch out for. I think it was a well-intentioned bill, but I personally think it's going to be very problematic. Other bills for fair housing, there was SB 1224, patroned by Senator Mamie Locke. This bill would add source of income as a protected class under Virginia's Fair Housing Act, and the goal is to reduce income discrimination, meaning Virginians who use public assistance or rental assistance to pay for housing, and the fact that many Virginians find it difficult to find and secure stable housing who use public assistance and rental assistance because many property owners and managers don't take and won't accept certain forms of public assistance or rental assistance. Very complicated issue, and so this was, I think, the first time in a long time that this bill popped up. And it's going to be sent to the Housing Commission because it is a technical issue. It involves so many stakeholders in the industry and nonprofits with localities and with the disability community that we wanted to pursue this bill and study this bill in a way that all the stakeholders could be at the table. So it is going to the Housing Commission where it will be studied this summer. Other bills on foreclosures, not only one bill that I saw related to foreclosures was introduced this year, SB 734, patroned by Senator Chap Peterson from Northern Virginia, basically says that if you use a false record or statement in a foreclosure, that it's fraud and that you can recoup, it allows a person to recoup damages and attorney's fees. It passed the Senate by a wide margin and unfortunately died in the House Courts Civil Subcommittee because there was no second to the motion to report it, meaning that when the bill came up, there was a vigorous debate about how there's actually really no way to crack down on foreclosure fraud in Virginia. You would have to, the only laws that prevent it, because banks are not under Virginia's consumer protection laws, they're not governed by those laws. And so there's very little way in the sense, there's almost no teeth in the code to crack down on people who basically do a foreclosure using false documents or false signatures or false statements. And so when there was a motion to report on this bill, there was no second, and so the bill died in the Civil Subcommittee of House Courts. Very unfortunate. This is a significant problem in Virginia. There was, like I mentioned earlier in the call, the Lender Processing Services settlement, where 46 states were part of that settlement, including Virginia. And so even the Attorney General's office was present and testified that Virginia had a much, much weaker connection or quote-unquote teeth through which to go after these folks, and had it not been for the other states, such as, for example, New York, California, that there may not have been a robust settlement the way there was. And so it is something that happens here in Richmond. It happened in Northern Virginia. It happened everywhere. There are literally, if you Google it, I mean, you don't even need to trust me on it, you will find the fake signatures and false documents that were used to pursue foreclosures. In some cases, these are foreclosures that would have happened anyway. In many cases, these are foreclosures that may not have happened because many of the homeowners were in the middle of the loan modification process and the foreclosure went ahead before they got a chance to be approved or unapproved or disapproved for a loan modification. So unfortunate state of affairs on foreclosure legislation in the General Assembly. I think that's it. I don't know if I really have too much more.
Scattered site.
Yeah, we covered that. Let me see.
Early lease termination.
Oh yeah, there was a really good bill on landlord-tenant, SB 1004, patroned by Senator Janet Howell from Fairfax, and it allowed victims of domestic violence and abuse to terminate their lease early if they provided some proof and gave proper notice. It passed unanimously through the Senate, and I believe passed unanimously out of the House, and so we are, I think it was a really good bill, and a lot of hard work went into it by Senator Howell, by the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and we're very excited that is there. I know that for home, we've had some homeowners who are our clients that have had problems with domestic violence and domestic abuse, and if a person doesn't have the ability to relocate to safety, it can really snowball into some unfortunate circumstances. And I think that's it.
Youth aging out of foster care.
I don't know a lot about that legislation.
It provides additional independent living services for crossover youth. Both.
Do you mind come over here so they can hear you?
Okay, so it's Senate Bill 863 and it's twin House Bill 1743. Both passed the House and the Senate unanimously. They're bills to to provide independent living services to the most vulnerable crossover youth, like youth aging out of foster care. We follow that.
Okay. Great. Well, I think those are all the updates we had. I guess we can take questions or comments. Let's take the snide remarks first.
Any questions on any of the bills that Ali has touched on? We did record this session, we videotaped it, and so we'll be posting a copy of this up to the Virginia Housing Coalition website in the next day or two. So if you know somebody who wanted to be on the call or who dropped off when we lost our internet connection and wasn't able to get reconnected, you'll be able to see the call up on the website. I guess the only other thing I would say in wrapping up is we feel pretty good about the fact that we're now the second session in a row where the General Assembly has put new money into housing, both housing and homelessness. And that's a very positive trend. Now, we recognize that a significant part of that was a result of some settlement money that came to the state, stemming from the mortgage and foreclosure crisis over the last 5 years. Last year, as you probably know, the state received $65 million from the National Mortgage Settlement. The General Assembly and the governor only put 11% of that to housing, $7 million. So while we were grateful for that $7 million, we were disappointed that we weren't able to get more of that money that really arrived at the state because of the issues and problems we've had in housing. This year, a little bit better. $3.5 million came to the state from the robo-signing settlement. $2 million of it went to housing, so that's a significant improvement, just under 60% of that money. It is almost a certainty that there will be additional settlement money still coming to Virginia over the next year or two. It's likely that there will be several other banks still to join the national mortgage settlement that happened last year, and there's a number of other suits, class action suits, that are still in process. So that will be an opportunity going forward, but more importantly, I think we need to find ways to build a more sustainable source of funding into Virginia's budget for housing and for homelessness, so that we're not dependent on these one-time payments that are coming to the state. And that's a vote of approval from someone's dog in the background there for that strategy. So thanks everybody for, none of this would have happened last year or this year if we hadn't been able to mobilize a lot of grassroots support. And we really had an unprecedented amount of folks to contact legislators last year, either by phone, by mail, or electronically. We I think built on that from last year, and this year we had more of that success. Some of you may have used the new online advocacy system that the Housing Coalition implemented just before the session started. That makes it really simple and easy for you to send a message to, but not only your state elected officials, but also to your congressmen and senators. So I think with that, are there any other questions, or anyone have anything to add? I'd like to thank Ali for his great work during the session and for giving us this wrap-up today. And as I said, this will be posted up to the Virginia Housing Coalition website, virginiahousingcoalition.org, and you'll be able to view that in the next day or so. So thank you all for joining the call, and thank you all for your advocacy this year, and we'll stay in touch.